Hello and welcome to episode 23, when we're going to be looking at the Decca tree, a technique for recording stereo. Typically it's used for orchestras and large choirs in big spaces. The biggest problem with using the Decca tree technique is a physical one. It requires microphones to be put in particular places, and it requires them to be quite a way off the ground. I mean, typically between 3 and 4 meters above the ground. Now, that's not a particularly easy thing to arrange for many people, and it certainly put me off for years. But yesterday I thought I'd have a go and use it. I spent some time here organising brackets, stands and all the bits and pieces I needed to get it working. And being honest, it was a bit of a mammoth task. One of the benefits I find of recording stereo direct in an outside environment is that the equipment you need to take is usually fairly compact. I've got it standardized now. I've used a Zoom H6, and the Zoom H6 has got 4 usable inputs, and of course if you need it you can actually plug on the stereo mics onto the front of the unit, although obviously that means the recorder has to generally be in the middle, which is a bit impractical sometimes. But I quite like the H6. It's got really nice preamps. It's nice and simple to work, and the H6 for me is a great recorder. Normally when I go out to do a recording, I'll just take some high stands, and I've got ordinary microphone stands. I've also got some heavy duty tripod type things that I can get a microphone a little bit higher over the head of a conductor. But to do a Decca tree properly, you need to get higher than that. Now, that's one of the snags with it. I'm lucky enough to have some very high wind-up stands that I use for either loudspeakers or lighting, and they'll get me up really high. So what I did was I modified a T-bar. I've got a few T-bars that we use to hang lights and things on, and with a drill and a few extra holes I was able to mount on it a mounting point for an ordinary boom mic. If you look at the information on Decca trees, the placement of the microphones is pretty prescribed. There are various small differences between the sources that you'll use for information on the Decca tree, but in essence, it's a triangle of microphones. Now, there's a spacing difference, so there's one that goes left, one that goes right, and another that goes forward. So you've effectively created a triangle. And the centre microphone is closest to the performers, and then the 2 rear mics are actually 1.5 meters behind it. Those microphones that are on that rear plane are actually 2 meters from each other. So my crossbar worked pretty well. I've got the 2 meter separation between the left and right mic at the rear, and I've got 1.5 meters towards the performers. So it worked, and I bolted this thing together, pre-wired it, and then when I arrived at the venue, it was just a case of slotting it on top of the stand, winding the handle on the stand, and the thing zoomed up. First problem. The particular venue that had been told to me, I know for its rather unusual acoustics for a church. The best way to describe it is it's 2 churches side by side. And oddly, historically, that's exactly what it was. There was a boundary line between 2 parishes, and both parishes wanted to build a church. So they did, right next to each other. Over the years, the dividing wall between the 2 was removed, and so there is one church with its ceiling and another church with its ceiling next door. It gives it a rather peculiar acoustic. In essence, it's 2 small churches, sound-wise, and the holes between them don't really seem to change that very much. So for a large church, it actually sounds very small. It normally means that if I record there, I have to add reverb. I've got some quite nice favourite reverbs that I can use. But the actual sound you get there, if you clap your hands, is amazingly short. The RT60 time is about 1.5 seconds, something in that region. So that's pretty dead for a church. So I turned up at the venue and I'd got this thing all pre-rigged here, and I'd even got the cables neatly taped together, which is an achievement for me. But I turned up and spotted a problem straight away. Instead of being aligned down the church, as you'd normally expect, where you look down the long length of the church and you see a choir at one end, they'd set themselves up halfway down the church, facing the other space, with the arches between where I'd have to be and the choir. I mean, the choir were virtually up to the arch. So I had a quick think and decided the only practical way to do this recording was to record in the empty section through the arches to where the performers were. Now, Decca trees normally go at, you'll see the two common heights. 3 metres is mentioned, and you'll see some mentions of going up as far as 4. So between about 3 and 3.5 metres above the floor is normal for a Decca tree. That didn't really give me that good a view of the choir because they're all on the flat. So I figured that as I was in a completely different space, in a fairly dead environment, I needed to go a bit higher. So I was up to 4 metres and then looking through. Now that also caused some problems with my mic choice. If you look at Decca tree, you normally see it specified as 3 omnidirectional microphones as the minimum. Now the idea is that the 2 omnidirectional microphones, the left one and the right one, they give you an A-B pair. So looking back at some of our previous videos, the spaced microphones will give you a time difference between the left and the right, depending on where people are. Now, a spaced pair of A-Bs also give you a slight down spot in the middle. There's a bit in the middle that's a sort of hole, and anybody who is performing in the middle, equal between the 2 microphones, is recorded a little bit lower in volume than they really are. So the Decca tree, invented early in the 50s, had the 3rd microphone a little bit further forward, which of course, don't forget, gives you a time decrease. So the people in the middle are going to be slightly earlier, and of course with the central microphone they're essentially mono, and that made the middle people cut through a little bit better. Now the history of the Decca tree is quite interesting. The microphone that was popular at the time was the Neumann M49, which is an omnidirectional microphone. And the M49 looks like an ordinary, small, but large diaphragm microphone. I suppose in effect it looks a bit like the Tlm-103 type microphone now. It's a similar sort of design to that. But the Decca tree technique produced a demand for a different microphone. And Neumann produced an M50, which looks almost identical to an M49. But the M50 is a bit weird. Now, I'm not lucky enough to own one of those because I think I saw one on eBay a while back and it went for £4,500. So buying more than one of those is a sort of ridiculous type of thing. But the M50 differs in a very important way. It is not a large diaphragm condenser. It's in the large diaphragm condenser box, but inside is a sphere, and the small element is built into one face of it. Now, that's an omnidirectional element, so the actual cartridge itself, built into that sphere, is small. Attached to the sphere, what actually happens is you get directionality. So attached to the sphere, that omnidirectional microphone does become slightly directional at frequencies over about 1K. So by the time you get to sort of speech frequencies and above, it's demonstrating directional properties. It's not a cardioid, but it has reduced pickup from the rear. So M49s were proper omnis, M50s were sort of a halfway house between an omni and a cardioid. And the effect that this sphere had was just to give the higher frequencies more directional information. So reduced pickup from the rear, increased pickup from the front, and you've got a sort of Omni that gradually gets directional. It's very clever. The idea being that you'd use these M49s or the M50s, but if you use the M50s, then you also had to aim those microphones to where you wanted. So one would be looking at the left side, one would be looking at the right side, and the forward microphone would be looking at the centre. Now, I don't have access to clever microphones like M50s, but I do have access to these things. In the video we did the other day, I spoke about microphones that I bought when I needed Omni and Cardioid microphones for a project. And these are the ones that were made for me by Apex Tone in China. Essentially, fairly normal looking microphone housing. On the back, one switch, Omni or Cardioid, and on the front we've got a low pass and a -10 dB switch, but fairly basic things. So if I set it to Cardioid and spin it round, you can have a listen to what I sound like. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah, I'll do. So if I look at the front, which is the Cardioid facing me, and I spin it round, that's me going, that's me going, that's me on the back. So that's the rear of the Cardioid. If I come round again, that's the front of the Cardioid. Okay, if I now switch it to Omni, you can tell that there isn't a difference. I can spin the microphone all the way around. I'm talking into the back now. Now I go around the side and I'm talking into the front. And so I've got these microphones. Anyway, back to normal. What I decided to do was to use, in my cunning plan, 3 of these to do the Decca tree. So I've got the 2 for the back and I've got the 1 that goes out in front. And then I turned up at the venue and spotted the problem with the location. The microphone was also a little bit further away than it really should have been. One of the benefits of using a Decca tree, with it being so high, is that you can get it not behind the conductor's head, but you can get it over the top of the conductor. So in actual fact, the front mic is almost at the performers. It gives a very sort of I was there style result. Now that wasn't going to work because I couldn't get the microphone close enough. It was just impossible. So I had to move the Decca tree further away than I would have ideally liked. And I was a little bit worried that having one of these as the front mic was going to be a bit ineffective. So to try and get a little bit extra reach, I swapped the front one of these for a Neumann Tlm-103, a Cardioid microphone. I had read that a few people had tried this and it worked quite well, but I've never tried it before. So I decided to take the gamble, and I had 2 Omnis at the rear and I had the Cardioid at the front, and it seems to have paid off quite nicely. I'm quite pleased with the result. It was warmer than I expected, and I'll put the audio files up so that you can actually download them if you're interested, so you can actually hear the 3 microphones and maybe do your own mix and see if you can make it sound nice, see if you think it needs a bit of extra reverb. But the actual thing was solid, and I'll use it again. With all my experiments, I tend to do them, and then if they work, I use them, and if not, I sort of consign them to the scrap heap. And I've been recording for an awful long time, and I can't really work out why it's taken me so long to actually try out a Decca tree. I suspect it's the hassle of trying to get the microphones up in the air in the right place. I don't think I'd be able to use this technique for a concert that was being videoed, because it looks really, really ugly. And I had to use a wind-up stand to get it up there. It weighed quite a bit. The metal work up in the air was considerable. So with 3 microphones, the metal work, the stands, all on one place. So an ordinary microphone stand I don't think would have been safe. Certainly, I mean, you can put an ordinary microphone stand at its full height, which is about, I don't know, 5.5 feet, something like that. and then you can point the boom upwards, then I guess you could attach things to the top of that, but it really wouldn't be stable enough to be safe, especially when you're doing it in places where there are lots of performers and they trip over cables, don't they? So the idea of having something big and heavy above a conductor's head is a little bit scary. The lighting stand that I used weighs a huge amount, and there's no way that's going to fall over. It's far too massive for that. But it is about at my limits of carrying it in on my own. So it's not to be sort of toyed with. But the prospects of doing a Decca tree in the future, I think, are a positive one. I'm going to do it again. I certainly like what I recorded. And perhaps if the recording was for a specific purpose and was a bit more controlled, and I could have some say in where the performers were going to be, which I didn't get yesterday. I mean, they started the rehearsal when I arrived. The recording yesterday was actually for some sort of competition, I believe. So it was a case of go in, record it, give them the tracks and go away. And that's what I did. But it's an ideal example of a new technique for me, so I'm quite happy with that. So that's a quick walkthrough of the Decca tree. 3 to maybe 4 meters high, a triangle of microphones, the front one 1.5 meters closer to the performers than the back 2. Ideally they should be omnidirectionals, but a cardioid in front seems to be a little bit of a get out of jail card for not having that hole in the middle. You can actually add extra outriggers, so there's a rule for those as well. So if you've got a typical stage sized performance area, then you can move another microphone to the left, another microphone to the right, and those outriggers should be about the same height as the rear microphones on the array. Now, with a 3 microphone array, the middle microphone is panned centre, the 2 left ones are panned hard left and hard right. If you use outriggers, the outriggers are panned hard left and hard right, and the 2 on the actual tree are panned in between, so they're not quite so extreme, and that gives you an even wider sound field. The thing with the Decca tree is it gives you a very big sound. Even if you're listening on headphones or loudspeakers, it doesn't matter. You get a very big sound. And although you can say that's where the violins are, and that's where the cellos are, and that's where the percussion are, it doesn't let you hear that third person in the row. So if you've got a line of people and one of them is playing a solo line, you can't go there. You can tell they're in that sort of area, but you don't have precise directional information. An XY pair tends to give you more accurate imaging, so space between left and right, with your eyes closed, you've got a little bit more accuracy with XY, but you haven't got that big sound. So I think that's why the major recordings that you hear of orchestras and choirs tend to be done with Decca trees, mainly because it's just an excellent recording technique from the listener's perspective. It might lack a bit of accuracy maybe for the purists, but I think the overall sound that you get with a Decca tree is wonderful. So I'm going to use it again. So that's today's video. I hope it's been useful. If you like it, please hit the subscribe button and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.